Unlike my cinematic vlogs, which showcase more outdoors adventures, this video is really just a means to get to know me personally. My channel trailer shows off a bit of my cinematics, so I think this style of video is best to serve as my first official upload. So, let's begin. My name is Aiden Houston, and I'm a self-proclaimed jack of all trades. Here's what I mean by that. Growing up, I sort of just jumped from one phase to another. I wanted to be a scientist one minute, or an archaeologist, or a reporter, or a writer, or an astronaut. I can go on and on. My imagination was limitless, but my commitment not so much. I would never stick with a path. I often had little aim and direction for a long time. Then, near the tail end of my freshman year of high school, I made revelations that set me down a path of self-discovery. The first path I would seem to commit myself to. Over the course of the preceding 3 years, I never chose a particular career, but decided very early on that wherever my future led, it didn't involve a college. I graduated during the pandemic, got out of school 9 weeks early, and walked the line a month late. Those were strange times. Very strange times, especially when you're transitioning into the real world from a small town in West Tennessee. The first year after graduation was a year full of expanding my comfort zone, meeting new friends, making mistakes, stupid mistakes that would be valuable lessons in the future. As the pandemic began coming to an end, so was my transition period to adulthood. In 2022, I moved out of my parents' house and found a roommate in a different town. I got bills of my own, I was reliant on my own income, and I had adult friends. People the same age as me, people as old as my parents, and everywhere in between. But above all this, I never stepped off that path of self-discovery. And after all these years now of trial and error, I believe I have things figured out. And that, for me, has been the defining factor for adulthood. Coming to understand one's own purpose and determination to pursue it. I look back at all those constant phases and I see them now as obvious signs of who I was to become. My heart never settled on one thing. Rather, I saw every single thing that the world could offer, and I decided that I wanted it all. Or at least whatever I desire most, whenever I desire it. However, while looking at the world's possibilities, it was impossible to miss all of the problems at the same time. While I was discovering myself, I was also discovering how flawed of a society we live in. Don't get me wrong, we live in a wonderful and exciting time. But if pursuing my potential taught me anything, it's that humanity isn't living up to its own. Now, all my life I've been incredibly empathic, and I care deeply for my species and the world we call home. Among my many aspirations, I desire to see humanity thrive and to push the limits of understanding. However, many of us seem to be following a darker path, shrouded in ego, greed, and dopamine rushes. The people elected to be in charge are often frail, corrupt, and outright criminal. The same generation that has left the world to burn and to be a problem for future generations is still being put in positions of power to this day. I have very passionate beliefs about politics, philosophy, and how the two and should overlap. However, I'm no politician, nor do I desire to be. I know it's a losing battle when I see it. So part of growing up for me has been trying to figure out how to bring great change to the world while living the life that I feel is right in my soul. Basically, to get my cake and eat it too. And you know what? To hell with whoever said you can't do that. Going all the way back to high school, one thing I was always passionate about but never stepped up to the plate towards was wanting to be a YouTuber. This was back in 2016, 2018. The internet was a different time then. Nowadays, this would just be being an influencer. I don't know very many people that get by on just one platform. Anyway, I always had an affinity towards filming in a few different ways. When I was younger, I would make videos with my toys on an old Canon in 720p, uploaded completely uncut, with poor quality, poor scripting, and poor performance straight to YouTube. They were all around terrible, but I enjoyed the process. Later in life, I would go on to film a bit for my basketball team in high school. However, looking back, I was basically a human tripod and didn't commit nearly as much as I could have. Then later, once TikTok began blowing up, I got into a competition with a friend to see who could gain more followers. I started creating videos inspired by Isabella Avila's Psychology Facts series, I so creatively dubbed Facts About the Universe That Should Keep You Up at Night, or Space Facts for short. The cosmos had always been on my list of fascinations. I enjoyed learning as much about the universe we exist in as possible, so I instantly fell in love with making these videos. And it seemed like others felt the same way, because the first video blew up. I received more feedback off that first video than everything I had ever posted online combined. And the other videos did well. I was hooked. And even though at the time I had too many lessons about life that I needed to learn before I could commit myself to a career, the seeds of influencing had been planted. So fast forward to the dilemma about saving the world and living my truth. Well, I eventually realized that content creation was my solution. My skeleton key to the doors that life offers, the holy grail for getting attention without a political campaign. I could go out into the world pursuing an exciting, against-grain lifestyle, chasing one adventure to the next, following whatever path looks fun at the time, and film myself doing it. Turning that footage into cinematics and documentaries, sharing my philosophy of life with as many people as possible through entertainment, creating a catalog for a new way of thinking, a place where you can do it all, including having a cake and eating it too. I'd like to look at my life in chapters. Like if I were to die someday, my life will have been a complete book. However, right now we're but a few chapters in. I would say my childhood was all of chapter 1, the period of my life where I never thought too much about any one thing. I barely recognized the person I used to be due to the true self-discovery that marks the start of the next chapter. See, the revelation that I mentioned earlier that started it all is quite simple now that I think about it. But at the time, it was the most important thing to have ever crossed my mind. See, my family was Christian. Southern Baptist on my father's side, non-denominational on my mother's. God was in my household, but never shoved down my throat like in some, nor did I ever care to give much thought to the nature of faith. I believed in the Bible because I was told by my family that it was truth, and to a young mind like I had, why would family be wrong? That never stopped me from pondering questions every now and then, like, how come nobody talks about the incest that would have had to have occurred for all of humanity to have come from Adam and Eve? Or how dinosaurs fit into it all, and many other obvious contradictions our observable world creates in the Bible. Yet these questions never lingered long enough to bring any change. Until one day, when I learned the true meaning of an atheist. See, it had been a word that I heard tossed around in a derogatory way over the years. I hadn't realized what it meant to be one. I just assumed it was wrong or satanic based on the little context I ever heard it in. Then one day back in 2017, I decided to use Google for something besides watching porn and winning arguments. I did some research. I discovered that I had some serious misconceptions about atheists. They weren't satanic. In fact, they couldn't be. For an atheist simply just didn't believe in any of it. That blew my mind away. All the questions I had ever raised, it never dawned on me that just not believing in all of it was even an option. This was like the floodgates opening. The flood here being a euphemism for furthering my own education. I renounced Christianity and any and all gods. I became very secular, cared very deeply for peer-reviewed research, and I closed my mind to anything that wasn't proven undeniably. I began teaching myself how to think properly, and by that I mean how to take in information and actually do something meaningful with it. I started redefining who I was while drastically changing my perspective about the world I found myself in. This led me to notice the flaws in the education system, which I spent much of high school rebelling against rather pitifully. My newfound admiration for research and philosophy, piled on top of the chaos of the Trump administration, also pushed me into politics as well. Throughout school, I often found myself killing time researching contemporary issues simply to entertain and inform myself, hoping that someday I could make some positive change come from it all. I would say that this chapter of my life came to a close with the start of the pandemic, when things really started ramping up around March and April of 2020, and little did any of us know what we were in for. As a senior at the time, I was spending my school days goofing around with my peers, just making the most of a situation that we all had to be in. I had it easier than most too, since I wasn't going to college. I can't speak for the whole country, but in my little Tennessee school, the main focus of any upperclassman is college preparation and making good test scores. So in other terms, a giant waste of my time. When I look back though, I do cherish the time that I spent there. It did give my passions time to incubate. It still makes me a little sad even to look back at the last days of school, because thanks to the pandemic, my last day was in every sense of the word a normal day of school. My friends and I ended up missing a lot of the things that seniors look forward to. We never had a prom or a skip day or to play our intramurals, which was a tradition at our school at the end of every year where each class in the high school would play one another in a basketball game. Every single year we had come close to giving that year's seniors a run for their money. Now it was our turn, our rightful turn to take the victory that we always deserved. And that time never came. The class of 2020 was robbed of a true graduating experience, and that will haunt me for the rest of my life. But it's a hell of a marker for the start of the third chapter. This chapter consists of many mistakes and many learned lessons. As the summer of 2020 rolled around, I got dragged away from my small town by a friend of mine. I couldn't have known it at the time, but this would change my life forever. We wound up partying with some other kids that we had gone to school with in another town a few miles away. It was another small town, but it felt like a different world to a kid that grew up in the same place all his life. My friend was going through a lot at the time. She had just broken up with the love of her life and wasn't terribly open to moving back in with her family. While I eventually went back home, her time in this other town never stopped. She found people that she could stay with. Eventually, she met a family that she befriended and welcomed her in. Her time in that town was a constant spiral out of control. She had no purpose or direction, but being the good friend that I was, I would often go back and spend time with her, as did another good friend of ours. We became a trio, running amok, getting drunk and high and doing what young adults do. We spent a lot of time with the family that had welcomed my friend in as if she was their own. They were a wonderfully chaotic family, and soon became like a family to me as well. I was welcomed there as if it was my own home. Sometimes it felt even more so. It was around this time that I started shoplifting and became hooked with the rush of it. I went on for a while in small towns getting away with it, but the first time I ever stepped into a big city mall, I was like a goldfish that found itself in the ocean, and it wasn't long before sharks came. I wound up busted and on probation. I learned many good lessons from that, along with many other cases over the course of the pandemic. Eventually, I joined my friend at her job in a totally different town, an Italian restaurant where she was a waitress and was very close friends with the manager. I got hired on easily as a busboy. I would go on to work here for a very long time. As time went on, the family that had welcomed us in had to move to another state. It was time for my friend to move out. Fortunately for her, she managed to get back together with her ex. She's gone on to get a home of her own and has had a baby girl. But that's jumping too far ahead. At the time, she moved in with her boyfriend and his parents. I was living with my dad and stepmom at the time, having moved in with them for the first time since my parents' divorce years earlier. As the crazy nights in the other town began coming to an end around the spring of 2021, so did this chapter of my life. However, a few things persisted into the next, such as my probation. I had to serve 11 months, so I was still having to travel back to a city once a month to report in. The pandemic was still going strong too, reshaping our very society. I was also getting increasingly more comfortable at my job, becoming better friends with my coworkers at the same time. So this takes us into the fourth and most recent chapter. To understand the relationship that I built with these coworkers, you first have to understand and get an idea of the restaurant that we worked in. Anyone that's been in customer service knows that it can be a tense environment sometimes. People aren't always easy to handle, and while this was true here as it is anywhere else, it was far from the worst part of the job. Piled on top of it, our very management was a corrupt and greedy little family. They could make decent food, sure, and they knew how to keep the lights on. But other than that, they had little to no respect for their staff, the people that kept the place running. It made for a terribly toxic work environment. There was no escape either, as we had no break room. It was either facing customers on the floor or management in the back. Going to work there meant willingly sticking yourself between a rock and a hard place. Often I tell new young workers that this was really the best place to have as their first job, because if they can make it there, they can make it anywhere. And many didn't stick around long. It was no place for the faint of heart, for sure. Many of my friends there that had worked in other restaurants all vouched that we endured so much more cruelty from our owners than anywhere else. However, this wasn't all they would vouch for. They all agreed that this environment made for a much deeper bond between the co-workers that have stuck around the longest. It's not uncommon for people that work together for a long time to build a work family, but there's never been one quite like this. The longer I spent in this business and the closer I became with these people, the more my life transitioned from dance floors, beer pong, and hanging out with college kids to a more relaxed life of civil conversations, hanging out with adults, and building relationships with people I got to choose rather than the people that I grew up with. After the mistakes that I made the year before and the legal repercussions, this winding down to life was a sweet breath of fresh air. This would go on for the better part of a year. During this time, there was one coworker in particular that I grew closer towards. All my life, my friends were people that were stuck in the same town as me. We weren't friends because of our overwhelming things in common, but rather because we simply had no other options. This coworker became a damn fine friend. A true friend when I couldn't say that I had many left. It didn't take long before she was my best friend. While this was a much needed friendship at the time, I had no way of knowing it back then, but I was heading down a road of codependency. 2021 came and went, and 2022 started out strong. I got off of probation and put the legal trouble I caused myself behind me, hopefully for good. As time went on, things began to change, as they tend to do. One by one, I watched as different people left the restaurant for greener pastures or were fired for ridiculous reasons. For one reason or another, the work family started splitting up. It got thinner and thinner until only a tight-knit circle remained. The toxic atmosphere created in our workplace also only grew as time went on. Our lives were changing. Some were moving on and some were settling down, and although no one drew attention to it, it was obvious that the family was growing apart. Even the relationship with my best friend became unstable. I was rather oblivious to it at the time, but I was an emotional toll on her. She was one of the few people in my life that I could trust completely. My other close friends had boyfriends that took up most of their time, but she and I were both single and spent a lot of time together. My best friend was the only person that I really spoke to, or in other words, my emotional dumping ground. It wound up to the point where we were just too close to be just friends. Our boundaries were unhealthy. And the part that haunts me most about that is I was completely oblivious to it all until she had to shine a spotlight on it for me. Yet even then, I couldn't see the true nature of things, as I was far from in touch with myself. I had become completely codependent on her and strayed further and further from my own path without being aware of it. These revelations she brought to my attention resonated deeply with me. I had been doing something terrible, unconsciously, for a long time, and it ate me up inside. This lack of touch that I seemed to have with myself led me to do things I otherwise wouldn't have done. I was led astray, and while unintentional, I did things that hurt my best friend and wound up damaging the trust that we had built. I feared that this was the beginning of the end of the relationship that we had. This unraveling forced me to look inward, though. I knew I had issues that needed to be worked out. As I searched inside myself, I discovered a part of me that I had shunned for many years now. I had shown empathic traits my whole life. I was always in tune with my surroundings and the people within them. I made friends easily and was approachable and easy to talk to, and I've always cared deeply for the world. However, when I became terribly secular after renouncing religion, I viewed those traits as nothing more than just pieces of my personality. For they were, but they were so much more. But any of that was too far into the unresearched realm for me to entertain, and thus, I shut that part of me away. And because of that, I was unable to truly find myself no matter how much growing up I thought I was doing. Fortunately, one of the greatest things I learned from my old best friend was how to be more open-minded. This allowed me the freedom of thought to look inward deeper than ever before. I started researching what it meant to be an empath, and the more that I read, the more everything I experienced in life could be connected to this trait. All the seemingly random dots began to connect, like a piece of the puzzle that you add that doesn't quite finish the puzzle, but it adds just enough detail for you to see the bigger picture. I discovered that I had been an energy vampire to my friend. In my research and self-reflection, I learned how to take action towards recognizing that behavior so I'd never do it to anyone again. I also learned how to recognize when it's being done to me, along with much more. I slowly but surely was getting in touch with myself again and remembering where I was supposed to go in life. I had strayed off my path so far that I couldn't see it anymore, but thanks to embracing my empathy, it helped me to find it again. I did hours of research from empath authors and started to detox my life of heavy energies. I started a process of individualization and have been learning to unconditionally love myself since that day. The work family keeps growing more distant. The tight-knit circle is smaller than ever before. I'm no longer in touch with somebody that I was so close to only a few months ago. Some friends have gone off to school, and a surprising amount have decided to have families. Not just my old friend from school has had a baby girl, but 3 other friends are having babies as well. One of them happens to be slightly older than the rest of us, and this is her second child. However, the others are having their first children even before their brains are fully developed. This isn't me judging them, rather shedding light on how early they've decided to settle down. It's a blatant demonstration to me personally at just how quickly life tends to change around us. It's a constant stream, and we have to learn to go with the flow and adapt to the changing current, or we drown. It's a truly difficult pill to swallow. Sometimes I miss my old best friend terribly, but I stay strong and remind myself that I have to stay true to myself. And as much as it hurts, I have to let life keep moving on. I have to pursue the life that I envision for myself, no matter what. And this, ladies and gentlemen, catches you up with me today. This is the transitional period from that chapter into the next. The next chapter starts off alongside this channel. I've spent the last few years learning lessons that would shape me into the person that I am today. I feel truly in touch with who I am and what I want to make with my life. My philosophy is deeper than ever. And I believe now that we are our own gods, each responsible for ourselves, our own strengths, our own happiness, and our own purpose. I feel confident in tackling the rest of life. Finally, after all these years, ready to take on content creation serious enough to make a career out of it. I strongly feel like I'm going to live every single day living my own truth, or I will die trying. Yet the quest for individualization still rages on. I know who I would like to be, but I have a long way to go to be him, which is why I've decided to embrace the future completely. And the next chapter of my life is going to consist of a journey for self-discovery as I backpack over 2,000 miles from Georgia to Maine on the Appalachian Trail. It's currently the fall of 2022, and the end of the year is approaching fast. In less than 2 months, I'll be turning 21 years old, and to coincide with this milestone, I plan to hit the trailhead, which means I have now until then to prepare, and fortunately, we're already well on our way. The first videos that will accompany this are going to be small daily vlogs and a couple of adventures. Eventually, there's going to be preparation updates as the big day draws near, and when that day does arrive and we start to trail, every step forward is going to be documented thoroughly for this channel. I aim to achieve a few things by doing this. The first being to challenge myself, push my limits, step outside my comfort zone, and face whatever life throws at me to prepare myself for the journeys that'll come. I also wish to use this opportunity to make a name for myself from my content, building a platform here on YouTube and on TikTok, and I want to stand out as much as possible. I've spent countless hours now watching other videos of other AT hikers, and one thing that I want to strive for on the trail is creating a vicarious experience like no other, to capture the Appalachian Trail in a way nobody has. There's a lot of people that either are hiking this trail at my age that aren't vlogging it, or the people that are out there vlogging it are just not that familiar with how influencing online works. But I want to be a content creator and I want to hike this trail. I understand both of those worlds, and I believe that combining them, I could stand out from anything that already exists. I have big plans, and I'm only getting more excited as the days go on. I cannot wait to go on this journey with you. And that, dear listeners, brings us to the end of this video. I really enjoyed sitting down and providing this little breakdown of my life so far. It's been interesting, to say the least. If you enjoyed it too, be sure to show your support to my little ambitious channel by liking this video, and be sure to leave any feedback in the comments below. I'm glad that we're well introduced. Now don't forget to subscribe to join the journey, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for listening.